Society's tolerance of LGBTQ+ people has changed drastically throughout history, going through stages of both acceptance and hate. This is important because the past still influences society's views on them today, and it shows how their previous treatment could be considered a denial of their natural rights. LGBTQ people have been persecuted for the simple fact that they don't fit into what's considered the norm of gender identity or sexual orientation. Here's a straightforward explanation for some of the terms you already know and others you may not be as familiar with. The acronym LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning or queer. Lesbian means a woman who likes women. Gay means a man who likes men, but is also used as an umbrella term by many people in the community. Bisexual means someone who is attracted to two different genders. Someone who is transgender is someone who identifies as a different gender than the one they were assigned at birth. Q can stand for two things, questioning or queer. Questioning is a term for someone who doesn't know their sexual or gender identity. Queer was a slur for people in the community, but some have reclaimed it for themselves. LGBTQ+ people weren't always shunned. In ancient Greece, some of the greatest heroes and gods were part of the LGBT community. Sappho was a poet who wrote mainly about her love for women. Apollo, the god of music and the sun, was known to have relationships with both men and women. Achilles, a hero of the Trojan War, had a very close relationship with a man named Patroclus. In a Q&A on her website, Madeline Miller, the author of the Song of Achilles, says many Greco-Roman authors, including Plato, believe that Achilles and Patroclus were more than friends. She continues on, saying that in part of a lost tragedy of Aeschylus, Achilles speaks of frequent kisses with Patroclus. In the Iliad, there's a lot of subtext for their relationship, though Homer never makes it explicit. Miller says that to her, the most compelling evidence for their relationship is how Achilles grieves for Patroclus' death. He refuses to burn Patroclus' body, instead insisting on keeping it in his tent despite the horrified and somewhat disgusted reactions of those around him. After the body is finally burned, Achilles orders his ashes to be mixed with Patroclus' after his death. However, as history progressed, society grew less accepting. Before Hitler came to power, Germany had LGBTQ representation in media and was generally accepting. In 1933, Hitler began telling the country that gays are flawed because they didn't produce children. Known homosexuals were sent to concentration camps with the rest of the population that he deemed unwanted, like Jewish people, the disabled, and anyone who wasn't blonde or blue-eyed. Many Christians and Catholics believed that being gay or trans was a sin. By the 1950s, America was already very intolerant of the LGBTQ community. Alan Turing was a famous computer scientist and mathematician. During World War II, he broke the Enigma code, playing a central role in helping the Allies defeat Nazi Germany. He shortened the war by an estimated 2 years and saved over 14 million lives. Despite this, in 1952 he was convicted of homosexual acts and accepted chemical castration as an alternative to prison time. Just 2 years later, in 1954, he died of cyanide poisoning. It was ruled as a suicide. Many great minds were lost to the legal persecution of homosexuality. Because of an uprising in hatred, the LGBTQ community had to lead secret second lives. Police could arrest anyone if they were wearing less than 3 gender-appropriate pieces of clothing. This led to the common usage of slurs like faggot, dyke, homo, sodomite, it, referring to trans or gender non-conforming people, and tranny, which is short for transvestite. It also led to the rise of speakeasies and gay bars, which were places of refuge for the LGBTQ+ community, especially in the 1950s to 1960s.
Sandra Wilson is 24, and Kramer is 22. They've been living together for the past 2 years. When they were growing up, they experienced sexual feelings towards other girls which they were unable to understand. Attempting to deny these feelings, they both became involved in heterosexual relationships.
When I was having relationships with men and I was involved sexually, it wasn't satisfying, it wasn't stimulating. I didn't get aroused sexually.
For me, I kept saying I was going to get used to being in a heterosexual relationship. I will get used to it. That's all there is to it. There is no other alternative. I will get used to being in a heterosexual relationship. And that is more of a burden to have to deal with than to have to deal with other people's prejudices.
Just after 3 a.m. on June 28, 1969, police raided Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village, New York. The bar wasn't tipped off and 13 people were arrested. Among the arrested were employees and people not adhering to New York's gender laws. Suspected cross-dressers were taken to bathrooms to be checked by women police officers. A police officer hit a lesbian over the head as she was forced into the police van. She yelled at the surrounding people to do something, and they did. They threw things, and soon a riot had started. A few police officers, some hostages, and a Village Voice writer barricaded themselves in the bar, but the barricade was set on fire by the mob. The fire department and riot squad were eventually able to calm the mob down, but the protests continued for 5 more days in the surrounding area. Stonewall was the first step for LGBTQ+ rights, but homophobia was and still is a large issue. In 1972, Sweden became the first country in the world to allow transgender people to surgically change their sex and provide free hormone replacement therapy. In 1979, as part of a protest, a number of people in Sweden called in sick to work with a case of being homosexual, followed by the occupation of the National Board of Health and Welfare. After a couple of months, they declassified homosexuality as a mental illness. And in 1989, Denmark became the first country in the world to introduce registered partnerships for same-sex couples. Gay marriage was first legalized in the US 2 decades later on June 26, 2015. However, homophobia is still an issue 4 years later, especially in schools. Here's footage of interviews we had with real kids where we asked them questions about homophobia they've experienced in school. So, have there been any instances where in school or something you felt discriminated against or heard remarks that might have been homophobic?
Many times, actually. So mostly on the bus because it's an environment where teachers really can't hear you, but also I've heard it said many times, like when in classrooms.
Some people sometimes are like, are you gay or something, if they're doing something they don't like.
Like, I was on the bus, they say like, oh, you are gay, you are gonna go burn.
On my bus, did overhear a girl talking about how in gym, her gym teacher put her gym locker by people who she thought were lesbian. She didn't know this, but she thought they were lesbian, and she did not want her gym locker to be by them.
The worst experience I've personally had was when like somebody called me a faggot once. It was really, they were using it just as like a get out of my room, like mom or something like that, and they used that word, and that was really offensive.
And the teachers generally know that it's an issue, but they don't really do much to stop it, and if they do something to stop it, then I feel like the kid will make fun of them, but they won't stop saying anything. It's kind of dumb. And also just in general, whenever boys touch each other, they're immediately like, oh my god, no homo, bro.
Do you think homophobia in schools is a problem that should be addressed?
I think it is a problem because kids say these things, but sometimes they either heard it like in the media or from their parents, and so they repeat it, but they don't know what they're talking about.
In school, especially in like middle school, it's such a dangerous place because you really don't know what's gonna happen. Like you could get beaten up for it, or you could start to develop mental health issues.
Homophobic remarks are kind of just what happens in school. And I think the school can do things to change that and make students realize that this is a bad thing and it shouldn't happen.
But luckily it has gotten better. There's so much LGBTQ representation in shows now, which I'm super happy about. So we can let the next generation know like it's okay to be this way.
Society's tolerance of the LGBTQ+ community has improved drastically throughout history. However, previous harmful treatment still contributes to the stigma against them today. This is especially evident in our schools, as shown in the previous interviews. Throughout history, visionaries have been fighting for LGBTQ+ rights, but the fight still continues today.